Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Hauser, and it is a Saturday. So we get to hang out with our good pal Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons on all the places. And Jeff, man, thanks for tearing yourself away from your lovely family on this fine weekend. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. This is my favorite time of year. So it's starting to get a little more cooler outside, but not too cold. And we got football to watch today, next week. This is like the calm before the storm. It's my last Sunday of peace for 4 months. I'm excited, man. I just can't believe we're here. It feels like the summer flew by.
It did, which is always a little bittersweet, right? But are you a college football guy? Do you watch a lot of college football?
I used to. Right
Yeah.
now, if I'm like blocking out 10 hours every Sunday for NFL, it's hard to justify the Saturday.
Yeah.
And like I'm always jealous of like a lot of the Americans who have a team and who went to a school and they get to take so much pride in it. I went to school in Canada, obviously, and I've been to a bunch of trips, but now I really just watch to kind of follow draft prospects. I'll tune in when I can, but like I don't have a team. I'm not a hardcore college football guy. I kind of wish I was. I just don't have the time anymore. And so it's just usually I just start getting into draft mode around bowl season and I'll watch when I can. Like the game coming up today is pretty cool. I'm going to try to watch that game as much as I can, but
Yeah. I'm not like that's exactly what happened with me. I used to be a pretty big college football person, and then you got kids and you got to start prioritizing where you're going to steal your hours away from the family, and that just was not high enough on the list. But I am kind of part of the reason we're doing the show at 8 today is because I am interested in this game, the Texas Ohio State game. That's a pretty big opening weekend game, and I'm really curious about Arch Manning because I still believe. I've heard Byron Murphy talk about Quinn Ewers, and then I heard him talk about Arch Manning on Jonathan Hankins' podcast last year and a couple other places. And I thought I pretty clearly picked up that Murphy, kind of knew that Manning was going to be a much better quarterback than Ewers. And we're going to see because honestly, Texas had a chance to be a national champion the last couple of years, and I think Ewers was part of the reason they weren't. So, and he, from what I've seen so far, Jeff, in the NFL, did he even make the squad? I thought he's been awful during the preseason.
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm guessing it would be practice squad. That's like one team I just don't have like a feel for at all. The Dolphins, like they just feel so irrelevant right now to like my existence, but yeah, there were so many highlights of the rookie quarterbacks and Jackson Dart. I was seeing like a Jackson Dart clip every time I logged into my phone, but all I saw with Ewers was interceptions. And everyone who followed our draft shows knows how Brian felt about Quinn Ewers in the draft and the fear that all of us had, especially you, that we were going to take him in the second round. And when he went in the seventh, that'd be a little reassuring to you, I imagine, because that was a huge fear of yours, a huge fear of a lot of ours. And now all of a sudden they have like the number one prospect at quarterback, so it's a lot different.
It is. Well, and Ewers, it looks like he did make the 53-man roster from what I'm seeing. So good for him. I'm not rooting against him by any stretch, but look, I also was a pretty as negative as you can get on JJ McCarthy, and we're going to find out about him pretty soon as well. I wouldn't quite put JJ McCarthy in the Quinn Ewers category of, man, I don't think this guy's ever going to be good. But I thought JJ McCarthy was super overrated, and we're going to find out about him pretty soon as well. I was talking to Reef Hassan this week during the season preview, and he said things have been pretty positive. But I mean, I had read a lot of uneven reports about how they're feeling about JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, there was a lot of national reporting that they were kind of putting the media reporting in a bubble and they were trying to hide him. And it has been very uneven to come out of there. Some days people talk about how good he looks. Some days I've heard how bad he looks. I know like Diana Rossini and Colin Coward had questioned a lot of the reporting coming out of there. They think things may not have been rosy. I know they even questioned if they should have brought back Darnold, but it's a situation, and it's why I'm so excited for next week. That's what I love about the NFL. There's so many teams I'm so interested to watch. I don't know. Me and you do more reason, especially you do more research than anyone, and then the games start and everything looks completely different. And every year, that team, they play the Monday night, the first game of the year against the Bears, who obviously I'm not excited to watch Caleb Williams. I'm certainly not the biggest Caleb Williams guy, but I'm just curious to see how those guys look, because the way McCarthy played at Michigan was kind of how the Seahawks are probably going to ask Steph Darnold this year. Not a lot of the high degree difficulty plays. In Minnesota with Jefferson, and they got back Adam Thielen, but eventually Addison, they're not going to play that style. They don't have a good run game. And they're going to ask him to do a lot more. I don't know. We've never seen if he's built to handle it. And questions surrounding it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, their NFC North brothers, the Green Bay Packers, made the move heard around the NFL when they traded 2 first-round picks and Kenny Clark for Micah Parsons. And Jeff, you and I talked about whether the Seahawks should go after Parsons, a few different times. We've talked about other moves they could make. We kind of guessed about what the compensation was. Before we kind of, I have a lot of thoughts on this. We'll get into this in a bit. I'm curious, what was your reaction when that move was made?
That Dallas is inept as they look. Felt bad for Cowboys fans. One of the things I love about the NFL, if you follow other sports, is every team has just started making really smart, calculated moves. Like, you follow baseball, every team seems like they're run by like a Yale executive. In football, you still got some crazy 82-year-olds who are running teams, and that almost, for lack of a better term, that just felt like a dick swinging contest by the end. Jerry Jones versus David Mugoleta, or the power agent who represents Parsons, and it felt like Jones lost the contest and made it just a completely rash decision out of nowhere. And again, I saw your tweet yesterday. I thought it was dead on, where everyone's like, oh, this is the biggest mistake the Cowboys have ever made. The Cowboys were set up to be like a 8-win team this year, and with a coach that felt like a dead man walking and a roster that frankly wasn't good enough. It was a bad trade. And for the Packers, I think it's a pretty great move. It's all about windows when you make trades like this. Like when the Seahawks even made the Jamal Adams trade, which is kind of a laughingstock now, they had Russell Wilson and they were nearing the end of that window. While I thought it was an overpay at the time and I got it more, it made sense. The Packers are kind of like a souped up version of the Seahawks. And our Brewers talked about this, where they don't have a great player. They have a lot of good players. They've kind of fallen into the first, second round of the playoffs. And they were probably heading in that direction again this year. So I think them in that window where they're going to be picking in the 20s. And we've seen firsthand with Seattle, there's a huge difference between picking in the 20s, in the late 20s versus in the mid-teens or even in the top 10. We've seen the difference in Seattle's drafts and all those years where we just got met players because they had to draft second-round players. And that's frankly what's happened in Green Bay all these years. They've drafted defense like 8 of the last 10 years. And they have a lot of decent players, but not a lot of great players. And that's the tough part for Dallas. If I was Dallas and I was a competent organization, maybe you want to trade him to – he didn't have a no-trade clause. Like, you can trade him to a bad team, or you could trade him to someone in the other conference. To trade him to one of your rivals who's – this kind of could boost them into a Super Bowl level team. It's just perplexing, but not surprising at the same time.
Why do you think they did that? Do you think that was the best offer that they got?
I don't, but I think I heard Jerry Jones, when people start to get senile, and you guys saw it, kind of, if we want to bring him political, you saw what happened with Biden and some of the stuff he was saying at the end. And the thing he said in his press conference was they really wanted to prioritize a defensive tackle who can stop the run. And when you're trying to like rebuild a team from scratch and getting a 30-year-old, for whatever reason, they thought Kenny Clark was the centerpiece of the trade that pushed it over the edge. And no offense to the Cowboys, Kenny Clark's a good player. He had a bad year last year, but I think that's what really won the deal for them in their minds. And that is so out of touch, in my opinion. Even if you've been like a fantasy football pool and sometimes like a big trade happens and you're like, why didn't you ask me? I would have matched that offer. People are always surprised that actually happens in the NFL. Like we saw with the Jones Hootie trade this year, where it was like a 4th rounder. Like if you called 31 teams, you would have definitely better than that. And so I don't believe that's the best offer. I think, again, Jones got into the swinging contest with the agent and he's like, okay, I'm done with this guy, and just made the deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it took some wild twists and turns. You like John Kuhn, who is a former player, works for the Packers. It's like Micah freaking Parsons. He tweeted that, and then it came out the next day he was just trolling that he had no information and he's never going to break. So it seemed like there was nothing there, and then there was something there, and
Yeah.
then there was nothing there, and then all of a sudden the deal's done. And look, I think that. I mean, I've said it. I didn't think Jerry Jones was going to let Micah Parsons go. I just didn't think. I think Jerry Jones thinks of these players as his property, and I think that he wasn't going to get dictated to by Micah Parsons about whether he was going to play or not. And for them to make this deal, end of the day, I think they are convinced that this is a move to make them a better team. And that's interesting. And I think it's, as crazy as that sounds, I think it's worth at least having that conversation because of what, you referenced the tweet I said yesterday. So Mina Kimes said this is going to go down in one of the worst moves in history, in the NFL. And I love Mina, and I'm always hesitant to disagree with Mina, not because I have problems disagreeing with her, but because I know it's going to attract all these people that are misogynists that hate Mina because she's a woman. But I disagree with her on that. I think that for this to be a historic mistake, you have to have had some opportunity to actually be a great team to begin with. And the Cowboys, they're stuck. And I saw someone respond to my tweet. They're like, well, the Seahawks they're stuck too. And I'm like, well, they have been. We've talked about that for ages, but I think there's a much stronger case to be made that the Seahawks are ascending and building with one of the younger rosters in the NFL and strength at pretty much every position group versus the Cowboys, who have Dak and CeeDee Lamb and what else? Like George Pickens, like
kind of the discount Bengals.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't see it being a potential for a historic mistake. And Jeff, if you fast forward 3 years with the Cowboys and the chance of would they be a better team with Micah Parsons at 47, 45 million, whatever it would have been? Or will they be better with the 2 first-round picks, Kenny Clark, and whatever else comes of the void created by the $47 million, salary that they didn't have to spend in this particular one place? I'm not. I will say I'm not sure they're going to be worse going this direction. I am pretty sure they weren't going to be that good if they kept him. So that's where I don't see it as a historic mistake for the Cowboys. I do think the Cowboys come across as looking as completely inept because of when they made the deal and the fact that they clearly got kind of pushed into this eventually, as opposed to evaluating. They could have signed him a long time ago. Just negotiate with the agent, just do above board business, and this would never have been something to even worry about. So that's the part. I'm just the Cowboys are a joke franchise. It's a clown franchise right now for sure. And that part I get.
Yeah. If you were unsure about the Jerry Jones thing or how poorly that team's run, and this whole saga is a perfect indication of the issues going on there. And I talk about it all the time. The biggest thing in football that nobody talks about is the impact of the owner. And you see all these inept teams. A lot of that comes down to, and for them, their owner's their GM, and his son is second in command. And if you remember how Al Davis acted towards the end of his tenure and his life, Al Davis is one of the most brilliant football historians. Jerry Jones was more of a brilliant businessman. But when Al got into his 80s, he started acting completely irrational. He was holding on to policies that were 20 years outdated. They were drafting guys they were hiring coaches that no one else would hire just to control them. Brian Schottenheimer. And he would make these irrational, they traded Randy Moss for the same reason. They didn't get along with them. And Randy Moss went to New England and had one of the best years of any receiver in history. And there's just a lot of parallels there. And how things started to unravel. The son was second in command, and it's kind of sad to watch it play out again. But again, that's why I was with you. I didn't think there was any way that they would trade Micah Parsons. I thought the whole story was kind of silly. The more I've dove into it, and the more it's been reported, it just seemed like ego. Once Parsons agreed to that handshake deal with Jones, and Jones wouldn't negotiate again because he thought they had a deal in place. Apparently, he just has a policy. If you agree to a deal and you should go back on it, he doesn't want you around anymore.
Mm.
And that's an insane way to run a team. And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's not just, there's been years of this where they didn't sign Dak until the last minute, and they could have got Dak for like $10 million a year cheaper. And now Dak's the highest paid quarterback in the league, APY, and CeeDee Lamb, the same thing played out where they weren't going to sign him. They talked about training him. Micah Parsons was a player that you just don't find guys like that. Of the non-quarterbacks, he's got to be in the top 5 players in the league.
Yeah.
And one of the most important positions. And they let the whole thing, first they don't sign him early enough, which implodes, it completely inflates his value. And then they let the agent kind of force his way out of there, and ego gets the best of him, and he probably makes a trade that doesn't even maximize his value at an inefficient time. Like, you do that trade before the draft, you know what picks you're going to have. You're set up really well. You can have your whole offseason set up, and they just look completely inept.
Well, let's talk about it from the Packers' perspective. We're going to get to the Seahawks here in a bit. Here on our Seahawks Saturday, give the show a like and subscribe. This all builds into the Seahawks aspect of this, but Packers are in the NFC. Seahawks just play them in a joint practice and in the last preseason game. Packers are one of the youngest teams in the NFL, and Micah Parsons is a 26-year-old. People still feels like he's been around forever, but he's just 26. He's the same age. He's actually younger than Boye Mafe, if you can believe it. So what does this do in your perspective for the Packers? And how do you like the move from their perspective?
I absolutely love it from their perspective. They've been the good but not great team in the roster. Again, similar to what we've been talking about over the years with the Seahawks, they've drafted a lot of good players. Again, their receiving core, for example, they have all these number 2 guys. They hadn't drafted the number 1 receiver until this year. Seems like Matthew Golden's doing pretty well. They have a solid offensive line. They have decent defense that got better last year. A quarterback that's good but not great. And they were kind of just treading that water. And for that team with the window with all those young guys, and like you said, they're one of the youngest teams in the league, they can afford a splash like that because they're in the Super Bowl window with all these young guys on rookie deals. They don't have, again, because they have all these defensive players that haven't been great, they don't have a lot of looming huge extensions coming out. And like Lucas Van Ness was a high pick for them. He's been okay. And Quay Walker, and a bunch of guys like that. And so they really needed a turbocharged kind of move because they're probably going to be a 3rd place team in the NFC North, a good team. And the multiplying effect a trade like Parsons can have, what it can do for Rashawn Gary, what it can do for their other defensive players, where what a great player really does for you, I think it's very meaningful. I think it does elevate them to wildcard team to a contender in the NFC. And again, all of a sudden, everything connects together. And that's why when we first started talking about it with the Seahawks, there was a lot of logic to it. It was the same kind of story where the Seahawks could potentially are one great pass rusher away from going from a pretty good defense to a great defense. And I don't think Green Bay is going to have a great defense. But all of a sudden, if Green Bay's weakest spot right now is corner, and you add in one of the best pass rushers in the league, I think that has a domino effect on all kinds of things. And pass rushing last year, other than the Seattle game, they were one of the worst edge rush team in the league. Now I think you can make them a totally different unit. It does a world of difference for the whole team. And yeah, I commend them for making the deal.
Yeah, I like the deal for Green Bay. I think there's always massive overreaction to these things because, oh my God, they got this big name, right? And of course, he's one of the top pass rushers in the game. All that makes sense. I look, and the interesting thing here to me, Jeff, is when Albert Breer was in town, on my show, who did he compare the Seahawks to?
Was it the Packers?
The Green Bay Packers. He was like, these are 2 teams that are very young, that have a lot of good players, don't have a lot of great players, they haven't had those players take the next step to be blue chip kind of players. And I thought that was a really good comparison. I also think it's a pretty cool comparison because I like the Packers squad. I like that. I mean, 2 years ago, they took the 49ers to the edge in the playoffs. That was a powerhouse 49ers team. The Packers should have won that game. And then last year, they kind of crashed back to earth. I think Jordan Love was injured early. I don't think Jordan Love was that great last year. I think Jordan Love still has some questions to be answered. Absolutely. And yet I love their offensive line. I love LaFleur really impressed me last year with how he handled Love being out. he made Malik Willis a winning quarterback multiple times. Like, he adjusted their whole game plan. I like Edge Cooper, the linebacker that they added last year. I think they have some. I like Javon Bullard. I'm a big Javon Bullard guy. So like that, I like a lot of the things they've done. I'll say this: like, Micah Parsons is going to make them better, no doubt about it. I think honestly that Kenny Clark leaving is a bigger deal than people are making it out to be, because we've seen a 49ers team that added a bunch of pass rushers to their defensive line and lost the interior. Like, none of their interior guys could defend the run. And all of a sudden you start to be pushed around, and you look at the inside of their line. You got Carl Brooks now as their nose tackle, and Carl Brooks is a fine player, but he's not Kenny Clark. Devontae Wyatt, I just wonder. I mean, Lucas Van Ness, like Nazir Stackhouse, I think they've got some weakness in the middle of that line. And while I think Jerry Jones is crazy to think Kenny Clark's going to solve their running defense problems, he's a really good player. Kenny Clark's a really good player. I've always had a ton of respect for him. And so I don't think this makes the Packers some like juggernaut. I think for that to happen, Jordan Love needs to take a big step forward. And I think some of the other defensive players need to take a big step forward, but it puts them in the conversation for sure.
Yeah, and they played Detroit week 1, and so they're going to be tested right there, how well they can defend the run. Obviously, Detroit's lost those interior offensive linemen, but I think even with Sewell and with those guys, it's a very interesting matchup of strength on weakness, and I'm really curious to just see how that game plays out.
Yeah, and I mean, it's fascinating with Detroit because same division, right? Would you take the Lions roster or the Packers roster?
I think the Lions roster.
I would take the Lions roster.
There's
and
more,
I'd take
more
Aiden
blue
Hutchinson,
chips, yeah.
Honestly, like
Sewell alone, yeah.
Right. The offensive line talent that they've got there. I think that the running back talent, I certainly like better in Detroit. I love Josh Jacobs, but like I think
St. Brown over what they have at receiver.
Exactly. And then defensively, I think the Lions have a really good defense as well. So I'm not sure this changes the balance of power as much, even in that division, as people say, but that's not a hater thing. I'm just literally like, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, the Packers are now better. I think they're better, but they have different weaknesses than they did before. And I'm curious to see how that's going to play out once they get on the field. And when you're going against a Lions team that wants to run the ball on you, like up the middle, this is going to be a good test of whether they're actually better. Does Micah Parsons even factor in if it's a bunch of 3rd and 2s? How much is Micah Parsons getting off the ball? So we look at the Seahawks part of this, Jeff, and there's a few aspects of this. So I tweeted something out. We'll get to it in a second about my perspective based on what I know about whether the Seahawks were ever in on this deal or not. So I'll share a little bit more about that in a little bit. But before we get to that, let's talk about, were you jealous? Did you wish the Seahawks made this move?
Yeah, I was a little jealous. I'm definitely a little jealous. I thought it would be a higher price. Just, again, everyone cites the Jamal Adams trade, and I find some of that annoying, but they end up giving a 3rd rounder on top of the 2 firsts in that one. Well, obviously, they got Kenny Clark back, who's probably worth more than a 3rd round pick, but I did think it would be a higher price. So on some level, I was definitely jealous. Obviously, like if that came across my screen that it was the Seahawks, I would convince myself that in 10 seconds, and I'd be pretty excited. The thing that still makes me uneasy, and I know I've been the one saying a quarterback doesn't matter that much, but when you're a team that doesn't really have a franchise quarterback secured yet, maybe Darnold is, maybe Milroe is, but I feel very uneasy about giving up multiple 1st-round picks. And for the Seahawks, I know the Seahawks do need great players, and a great defensive player, I think, could unlock the best part of their team. But if this Darnold thing doesn't go well, and you're and you give up a pick and you can't draft the quarterback in the 1st round the next 2 years, that makes me really nervous. And that's for the Packers. They have Jordan Love. I think it's a no-brainer. If we had a secure friend, like when we had Russ, I feel way more easy doing this. And because edge rush is really outside of like the long-term quarterback uncertainty. edge rush is probably the biggest long-term question in Seattle. If you're looking at their team, Nwosu's an older player, DeMarcus Lawrence is an older player, Boye Mafe's in the last year of his deal. Derek Hall seems like a complimentary player. After this season, regardless of how all this goes, they're going to really need to address this. And so to get a 26-year-old guy in his prime, like, how do you argue with that? That solves your biggest problem. So on one level, I would be doing it, but I don't love giving up those picks right now if I'm at where Seattle is.
Yeah. In some ways, I would have liked the deal more for Seattle than I would have for Green Bay, because if you add Micah Parsons to the Seahawks, they're the best defense in the NFL. Like, I think unquestionably they are the best defense in the NFL. You can't double Micah Parsons and Leonard Williams and, whether it's Hall or Moffitt. Like, there's going to be, and then you got Mike McDonald scheming pressures behind it. Like, that's the best defense in football. Now, I think that it wouldn't have been the same deal. I think people are like, we talked about, Boye Mafe and 2 firsts instead of Kenny Clark. I don't think Boye Mafe and Kenny Clark are in the same category. I think Kenny Clark has accomplished more, and I think he's got more respect. I don't think you would have been able to get away with that. So you're either talking about more draft picks, or if you take Jerry Jones at his word, which I highly recommend you don't, and he wants a defensive tackle, then maybe you're talking about Byron Murphy and 2 firsts. How would you feel about that? That doesn't really make a lot of sense for the Seahawks, because then you have Parsons, Mafe, Nwosu, Lawrence, like that just doesn't make sense.
Too many guys.
So if it was Mafe and Kenneth Walker, if it was Mafe and Tariq Woolen, like other guys that maybe the Seahawks would not plan to sign to an extension and include in the deal. I still think it would have made sense for the Seahawks to consider some of those things.
Yeah.
I think that it would have been exciting for the Seahawks to do it. So from a football roster perspective and making this, I think adding Micah Parsons, and it sounds stupid to say, but I think Micah Parsons, even with the subtractions you would have made and the cost, I think could have been justifiable. I would have probably been on this show the next day saying this is a move that you make when you believe you are an elite edge rusher away from being a true contender. And I think that I could have talked myself into the fact that John and Mike think that might be the case.
Yeah, and it would have been a very easy thing to convince yourself in as a Seahawks fan, because they have Dirty in the building and who's worked with them, and Parsons has talked about his relationship with them. They have DeMarcus Lawrence, even though after you kind of went viral, it didn't seem like they were the best of friends. But
no,
if anyone knew everything there was to know about him, they would know him. And so from the Seahawks standpoint, it would be a very easy thing if they – and some people got uncomfortable with the $47 million APY. I think when you actually look at the first 3 years on the cap, it's pretty reasonable. And the Seahawks, because they don't have the franchise quarterback number, they could really afford it, and they have a ton of cap room in the next 2 years. They haven't really extended any of their players yet, and this would cut out a Boye Mafe extension out of there, or a Woolen extension, or a Walker. They could easily have fit this deal in.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no question about the money either. The price, I think, would have been a little higher. I agree with you. I don't think it would have made sense to give up Byron Murphy, even though I'm still not sure what he is. I think to run McDonald's defense, if you're light at defensive tackle, it becomes just very hard to run that defense. He talks about the run wall. But yeah, we're still back at that point now where it's a hope and a prayer that one of these guys is going to become good to great, rather than knowing or getting a guy who's one of the 10 most valuable players in the whole sport.
Yeah, I mean, just to illustrate that, Jeff, when I was going through my marathon 6-hour season preview on Thursday, one of the things I was doing was looking up the true pass set pressure rates, the win rates, the pass rush win rates for edge players when they're in true pass sets. And Boye Mafe is 17.6%. That's pretty good, but it ranks 40th in the NFL among edge rushers. And you're talking about the top, Aiden Hutchinson was 50% win rate last year. Micah Parsons is going to be 45% win rate. You're talking about every other true pass set, this guy is winning. And the Seahawks have guys that are winning at less than half that rate. So, I mean, I think that's a really good number to encapsulate how far the Seahawks edge rush has to go as individual players in order to be dangerous. Like, this is not the Rams in that regard, where, Jared Verse is one of those guys winning at a 40+% win rate in true pass set. So, I do think the edge rush is one of the biggest question marks going into this season. Not whether or not it's going to be competent, because it's going to be good. It's going to be fine. It's not going to be like, oh, this is terrible. But there's going to be games where most likely we're like, why is nobody getting pressure? Like, why? Like, we saw it last year. Why is nobody getting the quarterback? And I don't know. I don't know if either Mafe or Hall have taken that next step. You put Parsons in there instead, and man, it just turbocharges this whole thing. So I want to separate out whether or not I think it would have made sense for the Seahawks to make this move. And I think it would have potentially made sense depending on what the mechanics of the deal actually would have been, versus did the Seahawks really look at doing this deal? And I want to take a second on this, because I tweeted something out and people are looking for interpretation. And then Greg Bell wrote an article kind of like taking a shot a little bit at what I wrote. So let me just put this out there. So I tweeted that this wasn't that the Seahawks know as much about Micah Parsons as any other team. You've got Adam Dirty, who was his defensive line coach. Micah Parsons has spoken glowingly about him. They know each other well. You've got DeMarcus Lawrence, who, despite the little, Twitter war, I think they're probably pals and fine. They're teammates. They've been fine, but whatever. They know each other well. And I said, like, look, the Seahawks know this guy. And based off of everything I know, it wasn't about the cost. They weren't outbid. It wasn't an unwillingness to pay. Everyone's like, oh, Jody Allen would have never paid, or John Schneider would have never paid. No. That's not true. But I don't, based on everything I know, they were not in on this guy. They were not pursuing him. And people are like, well, is that a report? I'm like, well, for me, a report is when you have first party sources, multiple like verified sources that can tell you firsthand knowledge. I don't have those. So I'll admit that. I also talk to a lot of different folks who do have those connections, and I have, I don't generally report things, but I will say I have a lot of confidence that the Seahawks were not interested in pursuing Micah Parsons. And I think Greg Bell said something about the fact of, like, it's inaccurate to say, well, of course, of course they're going to inquire, but then he quickly came to the same, conclusion, like that, well, they decided not to. Okay. Like, whatever, man. Like, the point is, yes, you consider acquiring a blue chip guy, but then when it came down to it, they were not in on this. This was not a situation where the Seahawks tried to get him, couldn't come up with the right deal. They made their own decision that they weren't going to pursue this guy. And I have some guesses. I don't know for sure, but I have my guesses on why. And that's one of the things I want to talk about with you. But I'll pause there since I've monologued for a while.
Well, I saw the Greg Bell article yesterday, and I was kind of scratching my head at just like, is this a shot at you? Or I don't know what it was. And I read it, and really all he said in there was that they had a discussion whether they should do it or not. And that was it. You never alluded to they never had a discussion. Your whole idea was that they did have a discussion. So it wasn't just you who was right. I'm not just getting defensive over that, but when the first trade request came out, I think it was August 1st, somewhere around there, probably who I would think is the most connected guy in the beat, which is Brady Anderson. When he knows something, he does it in a very sly way where he's doing all these articles for ESPN, but he always has these throwaway lines in there, which is like he knows something. And the first thing was he wrote, the Seahawks are not going to make a trade for Parsons or Hendrickson, so probably get that out of the way. And he kept kind of throwing it into his articles like the Seahawks aren't going to. So once Brady said that, I kind of stopped thinking about it. I'm like, he knows something, obviously. And he seems to get these reports that no one else, who are the reporters on the beat, seems to get. And then when you put out your tweet the other day, Brady, a couple days later, put out another element to it that John Schneider and Mike McCarthy are pretty close. And I've talked about how my fear for years was that Mike McCarthy was going to be the next Seahawks head coach. And they're really close friends. Like I think he introduced him to his wife, and
Yeah.
he hired him in Green Bay, and again, so I think we're knowing where that story might have come from now, and I think it's pretty telling that the second it came out, he's been like, so I don't know, obviously, the rationale of why they came to that conclusion. I would guess it's something just personality wise, or I don't know, because obviously it's not an on field style thing. But when Brady says something, I always listen. I don't think he's been really wrong about anything since he's really taken over this beat. And I'm still waiting for the Jadeveon Clowney thing to happen. But I think that was the most telling thing I heard really from this time that Parsons trade request came out.
Yeah, I mean, so I was gonna try to play for you the Mike McDonald sound, but I'm just not gonna search for it because I can paraphrase it pretty well. I asked him a few days ago, like before the trade went down. I was like, hey, how important is it now that you've worked this hard to create this locker room culture and this identity that you guys are shaping and the connection that you're like cultivating in the team? How important is it to consider the person that you'd be bringing into the locker room and not just the player? And he was, I mean, Mike's not the most effusive guy. He was very eager to answer that question. Like, great question. He's super excited about it. And he's like, it's really important. Like, we want to bring Seahawks into this room. And we're very deliberate about that. And I connect that also to when I asked him at the draft, before the draft, I was like, you guys keep talking about adding good players, but you also need guys that are dogs out on the field, like that can absolutely like dominate. And sometimes you need a little screw loose to be able to do that. And he was very eager to answer that question. And he said, you know, Leonard Williams is a dog and Ernest Jones is a dog, and went through a list of players. And if you're listing guys on other teams, he'd probably say TJ Watt and, a bunch of other guys. And they can be good people as well. They don't have to be problems. And so that, to me, there's energy around this topic for him, for Mike McDonald, around this concept of we want you to love ball and we want you to be a person we can depend on who's great in the locker room. And my reading, based on everything I know, is that they determine Micah Parsons is not that guy. Either he doesn't love football as much as they want him to, could be an and or an or, he's not a guy they want in the locker room. And they have people that know him enough to make that assessment. And so the question for me then, Jeff, everyone's like, I'm not excusing that. I'm actually not like even saying I agree necessarily. I think that's the reason they don't make this move. And then the question becomes, is how do you feel about that as a kind of philosophy? Because it feels good maybe as a fan to say, okay, we're just going to have guys we can count on and guys that love ball, and this is going to be a really tough team. But if it means you're going to pass on generational players because they have big personalities, or because you don't know if you can control them, or you don't know if you can get them to fit in, can you be a Super Bowl team if you have that rule?
It's a really tricky situation for me as the outside to know, because I do get worried when I hear that they might overcompensate too much. And they've talked so much about kind of how good the locker room's been, the drama-free year. The guys they've gotten rid of, some of the messaging from Brady and other people seemed to be there was a lot of drama with DK and there was a lot of drama with Geno, and they've just been really happy of how things have gone. But then you see a situation like Parsons where, again, I don't know enough about him off the field to make a proper determination here. But if it's purely like he's too much of a drama guy and that they don't want to disrupt their room and we're going to pass on great players, that scares me a little bit, because you think of like the LOB teams, which is the opposite of that. That was pure chaos. And obviously Pete was uniquely built to handle that. I just hope that's not the only, if he's just like, if there's more to know, I don't want to just like judge the situation, because again, I don't have the information. But yeah, I hope there are situations where, I've been talking about this for years, you do need a couple guys whose screws are a little loose and guys who are a little crazy and guys that scare you. I think every team had the those kind of guys, and even the Ravens, they've had a few of those guys over the years. And it's worked really, really well. And so I hope they're just not only trying to take these like high character, nice guys. I think you need a couple guys that are a little nuts. And I think that's what the Seahawks have kind of lacked over the years. If they don't really have those guys, like Earl was definitely a little nuts, and Michael Bennett was definitely a little out there, and they needed those guys to win the Super Bowl. And like Richard Sherman, you might say he's got some drama, but no one loved football more than that guy. So I don't think that would be a guy that'd be like, we don't want him in our locker room. I think McDonald would absolutely love Richard Sherman. So it does make me a little nervous. I do trust Mike with this kind of stuff. I think his EQ has gone way better, but I just hope they're not overcompensating too far based on what's happened the last couple of years.
Yeah, this has become a question I'm really fascinated by, because I don't have my answer yet. I'm kind of like mulling it, to be honest. I look at the Baltimore Ravens as a team that Mike kind of cut his teeth with and has the most familiarity with, and Kyle Hamilton like fits this mold of a great player and a guy that you don't worry about being in your locker room. You know, Lamar Jackson, great player, no questions about him as a person or, you know, his character at all. You know, I think Derrick Henry probably fits into that. Like, you can kind of go through that whole locker room and it's
pretty clean.
A bunch of John Harbaugh, like high character, quality guys that are also really good at football. They haven't won a Super Bowl. They haven't even gotten to a Super Bowl, like with this group at least.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that means that it's proof that it's not good enough, but I'm just saying like it isn't proof that it is either.
Oh, and Ray Lewis worked out pretty well.
Right. Like, and to your point, like your point, if we were to apply this new potential, and this is all conjecture, we don't have certainty on this, but this is just evaluating it, right? If we were to apply this same filter and said, which Seahawks from the LOB would have gotten in the door now? I don't know if Richard Sherman would have, honestly. Like, Richard Sherman is
initially, no, that was
he's a massive handful as a personality,
and that was a pure Pete thing. I don't think the Seahawks make that draft pick if Pete didn't have the recruiting knowledge they did.
Yeah,
where that was a really unique evaluation that Pete brought to the table. Earl Thomas, like, that's a big question for me.
Yeah. Like a lot of like Marshawn. Like,
yeah, I don't think they make. Well, John loved Marshawn from the draft, but the guy Andrew Brandt once telling me like he was so upset when the Packers didn't get Marshawn in the draft, and so. But I think it was really Pete that drove. We need this guy to change our locker room. So
yeah,
it's a great question. And even like Baltimore, Terrell Suggs, that was the previous Ozzie Newsome and those guys that drafted him. That guy certainly has a couple screws loose, and that's kind of what I loved about Jared Verse that year. He reminded me so much of him both on and off the field. And so it's going to be something to watch over the next couple of years, because obviously they've had a very clean offseason with guys like Gray Zabel and Cooper Kupp and guys they re-signed. Jaron Reed, they obviously love. Ernest Jones, like really good guys and all good football players. But as we get through the draft and there are other periods of acquisition, I get nervous that this becomes a little bit of an overcompensation. I'm curious how him and Worry, kind of his personality comes to the forefront and what he's like over this time, because I don't know much about his personality. So it's going to be a really fun thing to watch. And I just hope it's not, we're almost where you get too arrogant about it.
Well, we lived through the Tim Ruskell era, right? And that was a time where Tim Ruskell thought all you needed to do was be a high character guy. It didn't matter if you were a mediocre athlete. And, you know, you ended up with a bunch of terrible Lawrence Jackson and like just terrible picks, right? And it was like one of the worst talent evaluating times in this franchise's history.
Well, even coming out of like the 2017 LOB era, after Malik McDowell, it felt like they kind of overcompensated a little bit.
They did.
And Rashad Penny and LJ Collier. And they kind of went the other way with Jamal, because they're like, oh, we don't have enough energy in the locker room. And it felt like they were kind of chasing it for all those years. Now it really, on a positive side, it really feels like they find like the equilibrium of they know what they want. I know how to identify it. I think getting Mike in there has helped with John. I think they're really on the same page. But we've seen this regime, the GM, kind of lose that to an extent. And I think how the LOB and how the whole Super Bowl thing ended kind of left a black mark for some of them in some ways. And
the thing that kind of comes to mind for me, Jeff, is is building a Super Bowl roster. Is it like building a house where you're literally need a stable foundation, and then you add brick after brick, and you add the framing, and it's a very linear kind of, you get the right solid pieces together and it can withstand anything that comes its way? Or is it more like a chemistry, like a pharma project, where you're adding a bunch of ingredients that potentially, some of them are stable, some of them are unstable. It can be combustible and it can blow up in your face, or it can become one of the most valuable compounds on the planet. And I personally believe it's the latter. Like, I think it's not as predictable as that. And I think if you just think you're going to add stable compound after stable compound, and I've probably failed chemistry, so I'm not going to get
both sides
analogy, but I'm not sure. I'm not saying I'm sure it's not going to work, but I am not sure. And I don't think this means the Seahawks don't have personality. Like, this draft class, Gray Zabel, like the whole draft class has tons of Riz, I think. But yeah, like, that's not even a question. I don't know how many. I don't know if I like the idea of like crossing off players, partially because we don't know if we can have the locker room. Like, in some ways, that's already admitting a defeat about your ability to manage personalities. And that's like, I don't know if I feel like that's the right way to go, or if they're really wise and saying like, hey, they do have something special growing in that locker room. Why mess with it? Like, I can see both sides, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of teams, like when they're first building their locker room, and like this is Mike's second year, they believe you kind of set the foundation first, and once you're kind of ready, then you're more comfortable dropping someone in. And there's a lot of teams who just view, but there's a team like Tampa Bay, who's one of John's best buddies in the league. They really, really value character, and their team, like, they're one of the best drafting teams. But John grew up with Ted Thompson and the Packers, and you've kind of seen how they've built their teams, other than like the move they made the other day. It feels more like that kind of school is the foundation of the house. And you really stick to the kind of teams you know and the players you know. And like Ted Thompson, it was so stringent in the things he believed in, and how he was stubborn in a lot of ways, but he was really just, he grew up around, and Ron Wolf was probably a little more like the last example. And so I'm very curious to see where this goes, because now they have Mike's second year. They really seem to have built a stable thing here. Next year, are you more comfortable dropping in some chemistry, high-risk players, or are you just going to stick to that model? It's going to be very fascinating to watch, if this year goes well, how they continue to grow this thing from here.
Yeah. I think that's right. And my last thought here, I'll just leave, and then we'll talk about some other stuff. But my guess, Jeff, is there's some kind of, not like hard-coded formula, but there is some combination between how much do you love football and how reliable are you as a person that you can count on, this is going to be a good person to have in the locker room. And I think in this case, my guess, this is a guess, I think there were questions on both parts with Micah Parsons.
Well, it's not just us saying this. If you read Albert Breer's breakdown of the trade, and Albert went through like the really inside, he alluded to the same kind of things that Dallas had concerns about. And some people think it's just damage control, or they're trying to cover because they did try to ultimately pay him. So obviously this wasn't the biggest deal, but in Breer's article, it did talk about, there were questions about how he's going to handle money like that, his entourage off the field, how much does he love football, is he paying attention during meetings? And then you hear Tyler Lockett talk about how Mike Macdonald is. He's kind of more of a military oriented. And now I wonder, like, was Lockett even a fit for this locker room? Did he love football at this level? And you hear like how Ernest Jones and you hear Cooper Kupp, how they talk about it. And those guys must just love Mike, and Mike must love those guys. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be a really big part of the players they bring in. And again, Richard Sherman had crazy personality. But the guy's a football savant. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think if he got him in the room, he would have loved Mike Macdonald. And you can hear the way he talked about them the other day. You can see there's a mutual admiration. But I think that's a big part of the Parsons thing. And I think that's a big part of their player evaluation going forward.
Yeah. Really well said. And Got a couple super chats here. We'll get to these and we'll talk a couple more things before we wrap up. Adam Gregg says, just scored some tickets for the Tampa Bay game on HBTix, HBTIX.com. Great seats that would be outside my budget without the kindness of a season ticket holder. Awesome service, Brian. Much appreciated. Go Hawks, man. I love that. That's what it's about. And for people that don't know, I don't take anything. I don't take any fees from this. This is just connecting Seahawks fans so they can get Seahawks fans in seats at Lumen Field. And a lot of times season ticket holders do give known Seahawks fans a break, which is why it's so important to really verify that you are selling it to a Seahawks fan, because other fans are going to find out about this service, think that they can get cheaper seats, and try to use it to get into the field. So let's make sure we take our just basic precautions. If you're going to sell your tickets to somebody on HBTix and they've listed their Twitter account or their Instagram account, and you see on there that they're talking about the Seahawks, great. Have them DM you from that account. Like, make sure that they own that account and they didn't just link to someone else's account that happens to be a Seahawks fan. Like, verify that you're getting Seahawks fans in the door. And by the way, Jeff, we hit 10,000 followers on Instagram, which means I'm giving away 2 club level seats to the 49ers versus Seahawks game. We're actually not totally out of the realm of hitting 25,000 subscribers on YouTube before, so we'll give away even more tickets. But excited to give away those tickets pretty soon, and you better believe I'm going to be giving those away to Seahawks fans. So evaluating who that'll be right now.
It's been cool to see just this continue to grow, and I'm usually get a couple hours before bed once my son goes to bed, constantly on my YouTube, and obviously I have an algorithm that's really Seahawks driven, and I was a little excited but also alarmed that at one point last week our show had a higher hits than your show with Matt Hasselbeck, and you guys should be ashamed of yourself. You should not be watching me over Matt Hasselbeck. That was one of the great interviews you've ever had. So it was really cool. It's been cool to see this thing continue to grow, but hopefully the Hasselbeck interview has lapped me by now. But
I doubt it. I doubt it. You're a very popular figure, man, and well earned. But it was great talking to Matt. And I know his high school, the team that he's coaching, lost a tough game last night. So hopefully they're healing up on this Saturday. All right, a couple more super chats. Sheed says, Maddie and Griff have the Niners and Steelers winning. So they have the Seahawks going, it sounds like 0-2 in their first 2 games. Doesn't phase me that much. That's not a crazy thing to predict, I don't think.
No, these are 50-50 games. The Niners are favored. And
the Steelers are favored.
The Steelers are favored. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, I mean, I won't be happy if it happens. Like,
it'll get very sweaty around the Seahawks line.
Yeah, I will not be happy if that happens, but I think that is a absolute possible outcome. Yeah, if you don't, then awesome. I love the confidence, but I think that's real. Big Mike says, Jeff, are you coming out for a game this year, or is the newborn still too newly born?
I would have thought it would be too newly born, but I'm not coming to a Seattle game in Seattle this year. I actually have 2 road trips booked. And so if anyone's going to these games, hopefully we can catch up, or you can see me at these tailgates or at the game. But I'm going to Arizona week 4 for the Thursday night game. I'll be there with my wife. It'll be her first ever Seahawks game. I was shocked she wanted to go with leaving our son for the first time. And then a lot of us from the Hawk Blogger crew are going to be in Nashville. So I already have 2 trips planned, which is way more than I remember when I had the kid. Brian's like, well, you're not going on any football trip for like the next few years. I'm going to be at 2 road games this year. No Seattle, unfortunately, this year. A bunch of the other guys will be in Seattle, but hopefully I'll be out there this year.
We got a couple more minutes left, and we'll wrap up here, Jeff. What else caught your attention this week? Seahawks or otherwise?
It seems like the Seahawks are starting to get a little more buzz, which surprised me. Like, I've heard a couple of Bill Simmons shows who was very high on them last year, then got very down once the Geno trade happened. And it seems like the national media has started to catch on a little bit, but no one knows how to pronounce Robbie Outs' name for whatever reason. I heard Jordan Rodriguez call him like Robbie Outs this week, and I don't know why. And the other thing that I've caught my attention is just, it seems like every season preview show I watch is the exact same. It seems like there's so much groupthink in the media, or everyone expects like the exact same things to happen, which goes against pretty much everything we know about the NFL. And so I was just trying to think about like who are the teams where we're going to be wrong about. Like last year, if anyone would have told you the Niners would have won 6 games coming off that Super Bowl loss, no one would have believed you. And so I've just been trying to listen, trying to figure out who the teams that everyone's going to be wrong about. I'm hoping it's the Rams. I'm hoping it's the Niners. But I listened to your 6-hour show, and I was interested to see how many of the different writers of different teams kind of had the Cardinals and Seahawks as the team. Like the Cardinals guy, Grant, it seemed like, and then even like the Falcons guys seemed pretty down on their team. But it seemed like there's a lot more respect for the Cardinals and the Seahawks than I would have. I know I've seen it from one corner with the Cardinals, but I was surprised to hear that.
Yeah, I still, I mean, generally, I think the NFC West is the division that people have gotten wrong the most. That's my read on it. And I was prepping to do a show yesterday before all hell broke loose in my household, but I won't go into that story. But I've got a bunch of stuff around what the national media has wrong about the NFC West. It's not just about the Seahawks. It's about the 49ers. It's about the Cardinals, about the Rams. And so I've got all this data I'm going to share on a show. Probably, I guess it'll be Monday. But this is one of those things. Like I love being wrong, Jeff, because I learn when I'm wrong about something. I honestly do. It's like generally love it. I don't like being wrong about the Seahawks. I don't love that usually. Unless I'm predicting them to do poorly and they do well. But I feel pretty confident that people are focusing on the wrong things on just about every team in this division. And the biggest thing that people say about the Seahawks, there's 2 things that the naysayers say. One is there's just too many questions on offense. We got to see it, and they don't have there's just not a lot of proof. The guys that they're counting on, Clint Kubiak and Sam Darnold, we just don't know enough about these guys to they don't have enough track record to feel good about them. Okay, I've seen a lot more of them than they have at this point. You've seen a lot more of them than they have at this point. A lot of those people aren't just not paying attention. And the signs are pretty positive. The other thing that people say is, it's just it's not talented enough. Like the offense is not talented enough. The offensive line's really bad. They're going to struggle. I don't know. We're going to find out. I mean, I don't think that to be the case either. Even Matt Calkins, the Seattle Times columnist, wrote this wide receiver room is terrible. And I'm like, well, I thought that at the beginning of camp. I'm not sure I think it's terrible with Torrey Horton anymore. I'm not sorry. It's a top wide receiver room, but I don't think it's terrible. So I can't wait. We're 8 days away from finding out.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that people got wrong about the Seahawks offseason was the Cooper Kupp or DK Metcalf thing. And look, when we did our show, did the receiver room get better or worse? We all would have said worse. And I think once I've seen the offense and I can kind of envision what they're trying to do, I don't think having a receiver that's that much better and that style of receiver really fits. And Grant was talking about that really, really well, how they didn't have a lot of plays that went over the top over the years in that offense. And it's been a middle of the field offense, and it's been a route running offense. And I think there's way too much emphasis because of where the league's gone on receiver. And for example, the Bills last year, they lost Stephon Diggs. And the consensus on the Bills last year, and I fell victim to this, was they're going to take a huge step back. They lost Gabe Davis. They lost Stephon Diggs. The only player they brought in, I think, was Khalil Shakir. And everyone's like, they're screwed. They're going to be a 12-win team into a 9. And what happened? They were a much more run-heavy team. They threw to the tight ends. They threw to the middle of the field with Shakir. And their offense was more efficient. And I think the Seattle doesn't have Josh Allen by any means. I'm not saying they're going to be the Bills, but I think receiver, because of just the popularity of the position, fantasy football, we all made the same mistake. And you looked, a lot of people picked the Jets to win the AFC East last year for that reason. I think the Seahawks offense with the tight end, with the running game, I don't think receiver outside of JSN, and as long as it's competent, I don't think it's that much of a hindrance. And I think that's the thing most people have completely wrong because they see the gap between an older Cup and DK as so big that's just going to crush the offense. And I think that story is where everyone is just missing the boat on this team.
Yeah, the one thing I will agree with about the receiver room is you lose JSN, and Dana made this point on our prediction show. You lose JSN, and it's really concerning. And I agree with that. I don't think this team is set up in a way where they can lose. Last year, they lost DK Metcalf for a few games, and JSN went off. Like, he was ready to take the load. They don't have. I don't think Torrey Horton, as much as I think highly of him, I don't think either he or Cooper Kupp are guys you can have as your number one option right now. So that is as a risky part of this group. I think every team, like, to some extent, you could point to a position group where if they lose that guy, it might not go over very well.
Yeah, Daniel Jeremiah, who used to be a pretty high-level pro scout, does a segment every year called Jenga Pieces, where if you pull the Jenga piece out, the whole board collapses. And so every team always has one. And he always does it. You can't do the quarterback. This Jenga piece for this team is absolutely JSN. If you pull JSN, maybe Ernest Jones out of there, things could get Abe Lucas. But at least like Josh Jones can be at least somewhat competent. Last year was absolutely Abe Lucas. We saw Stone Forsythe play, and it was collapsed any quality they had. And now Stone Forsythe is with Pete Carroll. But this is the thing that everyone looks at when they're evaluating rosters. Who are those Jenga pieces? I think JSN's a good call out for this team.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, man, let's wrap there. We'll go watch Arch Manning go up against Ohio State and Jeremiah Smith. And man, we are a few days away from our first Real Hawk Talk preview show where we'll preview the game against the 49ers. We'll make our predictions, and then we'll get right into it. We're a week away, man. So good to see you. Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too, man. Enjoy the peace while we have it.
All right, everybody. That was Jeff Simmons and a Seahawks Saturday. I will see you all maybe tomorrow, maybe not. Depends on some things. I've actually got an early morning tea time tomorrow, so we'll see how the day winds up. But until then, thanks for liking the show, subscribe, and watch, and have a great rest of your Saturday. I'm Brian Emhauser. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.